Hi, it's Marissa from BumblebeeApothecary.com. Welcome back. Today I'd like to show you how to make a Nourishing Traditions sourdough bread. So let's jump right into how to make this Nourishing Traditions sourdough bread, and then after I'm done showing you the recipe, I'm going to talk a little bit about some different tips on what types of flours you might want to think about using and just some other things to know. You can make this using your homemade sourdough starter that I showed you how to make in another video, which I'll link below. The first thing that I'm going to be doing is to take some starter. I'm going to be using my sourdough starter that I prepared. So you need 2 quarts of sourdough starter for this recipe. You want it to be active and bubbly, so it takes a certain number of days to be able to get that amount of sourdough starter and to have it fed oftentimes enough to where it's live and active and bubbly. So this does take a little bit of planning ahead, but as you get used to it, you can very easily work making sourdough bread into your weekly routine. So I'm going to start by adding my sourdough starter to my mixing bowl, along with the salt and 1 cup of water. I'm using 2.5 tablespoons of salt. Then I'm just going to mix this well until the salt crystals have dissolved. After the salt is dissolved, I'm going to slowly mix in the flour. I'm going to be using about 13 cups of freshly ground flour. This is going to vary a lot depending on the type of flour that you're using, how wet or dry your sourdough starter is, whether or not your flour is freshly ground or has been sitting around for a little bit. Lots of different factors come into play, but you want to just start with maybe around 10 cups or so, and then add more if you need to. As you get more and more flour mixed in, you're going to probably find that it's easier to mix the dough with your hands. If it starts to become too dry, you can add water if you need to, about 1/2 cup if it becomes too thick. But you want it to be dry enough that you can handle it, if that makes sense. And you can see how this is like on the sticky side, but you can still work with it. So you knead it by pulling and folding over in the bowl for 10 to 15 minutes if you're doing it by hand. You can also knead it in a mixer, and you just want to watch that it doesn't get over mixed if you're in a mixer. Once you're done kneading your dough, you're going to be careful to not pack it down or press it down too much, because that will get rid of some of the air, but you can cut it or shape it into loaves. You will want to cut some slits in the top of your loaves, and then you're going to cover them with a towel and let them rise from 4 to 12 hours. And I know that that is a huge time range, but that just depends on the temperature in your home. If it's summertime, the rising process is going to be much shorter, and if it's colder in your home, it's going to take a lot longer. Basically what you look for is to make sure that it looks like it's risen, like it's a nice round shape, it's noticeably quite a bit bigger. Just you want to have it look the way that you want it to look after it's done baking. And you'll get better at this the more that you bake sourdough bread. Once it's done rising, you're going to bake it at 350 degrees for about an hour. You know that it's done when you can take it out of the loaf pan or pick it up if it's a free-form loaf and tap on the bottom, and you want a nice hollow sound. You can let it cool out of the pan on a cooling rack, and it's best to let it cool a little bit before you start to slice it. So let's talk about the type of bread that you end up with when you follow this Nourishing Traditions sourdough bread recipe. So this is truly a very traditional, very healthy sourdough bread. It's probably, if you're used to store-bought bread or white flour bread, you're probably going to think that this is kind of a heavy loaf of bread, and it is. But it's great for like eating with soup. And you can slice it and make things with it. We do slice it and make sandwiches and stuff if you have an open mind and you're open to this type of bread. But it's really tasty. It has a wonderful sour flavor. You have some different options for flours when you're making this bread. Spelt is what Sally Fallon recommends in the Nourishing Traditions cookbook as giving the nicest results, and that's what I'm using in my bread. You can also use something like hard white wheat or hard red wheat. You can use kamut flour. It's an ancient grain that's related to wheat but a little bit different. You could try using all rye flour, but rye is kind of different, it has some different properties, and I'm going to talk some more about that in another video. It would end up a little different, but you could use it. When I'm making this particular recipe here for this video, I'm using a rye sourdough starter, and I'm using spelt flour. There's also a variation in the Nourishing Traditions cookbook if you do want to make a lighter loaf that is going to be probably more accepted by your family and maybe just nicer for slicing for sandwiches and things like that. And that is where you add 3 cups of white flour and 10 cups of whatever whole wheat flour that you're using. And that does lighten it up a lot and just make it nicer, and you still get all those great benefits of having the whole grains. So it's great. It's a little bit of a compromise, but it is such a healthier option compared to store-bought bread. If you're choosing white flour to use in a recipe like this, I really encourage you to look for some flour that is not enriched. The things that they add to the flour to make it enriched are actually not that good for our health, and so it's better to just use white flour that's not been enriched. I'm going to have some links below to some different places that I like to buy flour from so that you can find good options for these different flours that I'm talking about. You can freeze this bread for longer storage and it will stay good on your countertop for about a week. If your home is really warm, you might watch it carefully because it may start to mold before then, but in most cases it's good for about a week on your counter. So let me know what you think. Have you tried making sourdough bread at home before? What kind of flours do you like to use? Do you have any questions about anything? I will have a link below to my blog post where I have even more information and a printable recipe card if you want to grab that. If you're new, I also wanted to mention that I have a password protected member exclusive subscriber library on my blog. It's where I have all of my free ebooks and printables and everything all in one place. So if you're interested in that, there'll be a link below where you can get the information to log into that subscriber library. Okay, if you like seeing how I make Nourishing Traditions sourdough bread, give this video a thumbs up, share it with anybody else who you think might want to see it. If you're new to my channel, please hit that subscribe button. I make 2 new videos every week on nourishing recipes, natural remedies, and DIY skincare and home products. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.